and welcome to the Health GoLive webinar series. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Vanta. We would like to remind you that the Q&A feature is available, so feel free to send in your questions and comments throughout today's webinar. We would love to hear from you. And with that, I will turn it over to our moderator, Faisal Khan.
Hello, everyone. Welcome again to our fireside session today, where we'll focus on topics of HITRUST and just protecting PHI. We're really excited to talk to you about the world of HITRUST and not only how it can be used to comply with HIPAA's requirements, but also go beyond that to enhance and optimize your program further. That said, the first thing that want to do is just give us some time for a handful of introductions, as we do have a breadth of experience in the room here, and we'll be hearing from these speakers throughout the session here. But to kick that part off, I'll go first. My name is Faisal Khan, and I'm a GRC Solutions Specialist at Vanta. Vanta, for those that don't know about them, is a trust management platform, and we help organizations automate and optimize security and compliance programs that they have or maintain, or even want to create. And that includes framework readiness offerings such as HITRUST. My role there is to help our customers with questions around all things GRC, and that includes framework adoption related conversations as well. That said, I'm going to hand it over to Jenna, Ryan, and Shrish for intros of their own. And then after that, we can go ahead and dive in. Jenna, I'll hand it over to you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I am Jenna Parker. I am the Chief of Staff at Healthy. I graduated from Harvard with a BA in psychology and subsequently spent 10 years as a professional triathlete. Prior to working at Healthy, I helped build and launch an early stage venture fund and served as both a chief of staff and COO at 2 other seed stage startups. I chose to join Healthy because I wanted to work at an organization that was mission driven and truly focused on making a positive impact in healthcare. And it's amazing working at Healthy that I get to work not only for one company, but for thousands of innovative organizations that are working to revolutionize access and delivery of healthcare. Do you want me to go into what we do at Healthy? Is that helpful?
That would be great.
Great. So we are an API first EHR patient engagement and scheduling platform. Healthy was founded in 2016 with the idea that care delivery should be longitudinal, an ongoing relationship between the provider and patient, and that good care could and should have an asynchronous and virtual component to it. We believe that great healthcare is not and should not be merely episodic, where you're only visiting your care provider when you have an emergent issue. It should be ongoing and preventative. We're the back-end infrastructure for thousands of organizations across more than a dozen healthcare verticals. So we're completely segment agnostic. That includes behavioral health, women's health, MSK, chronic pain, nutrition, weight loss, primary care, and we support both cash pay, insurance-based, and also value-based care models. We've got more than 25,000 active clinicians on the Healthy platform. And what I love even more is that we've touched more than 10 million patient lives to date.
That's awesome. Super appreciate that. Ryan, I'll hand it over to you next.
Man, how do I follow that intro? Ryan Patrick, VP of Adoption at HITRUST. Been with HITRUST just under 3 years, but have been working with the framework for over a decade. So my background is primarily in healthcare cybersecurity. So I've worked for several different professional service firms, helping folks do everything from HITRUST work to penetration testing, tabletop exercises, risk analysis, and everything in between. Also have worked at a large health system in the security office, but probably more broadly, my background is foundationally built on top of my experience in the United States Army. So did about 20 years in the Army as an officer and an enlisted service member. So I offer that, and I always say this, that if I start talking about Army stuff, just let me go, I'll come back out of it. But I usually draw upon those experiences. So I want to let people know up front. Thanks.
That's awesome. Looking forward to hearing more about it. Shrish, off to you.
Thanks, Faisal. I don't know how to follow those 2 introductions there, but I'll try my best. So Shrish Vadarai, I'm the director of HITRUST here at A-LIGN. We are a cybersecurity company that specializes in performing audits across all frameworks. So SOC, ISO, PCI, FedRAMP, HITRUST, you name it, we do it. I've been here 8 years. I started my career at Ernst & Young, at the Big Four, did a lot of SOX 404 engagements, SOC 1, SOC 2, did some of the Channel 2 engagements as well on the internal audit side, then transitioned over here in 2017 and kept doing SOC. But then I was like, all right, I got to go, start looking at HITRUST, and here we are. We are proud to be one of the highest volume HITRUST assessor firms in the country, which means that we get a front row seat in looking at how organizations start their compliance journey from start, and then how do they evolve over time, and just the impact that the HITRUST assessment and the HITRUST certification has had, not only on the security enhancement standpoint for organizations, but also from the overall business growth standpoint. So I'm happy to talk about some of those things today. So
Thank you, Shrish. And thank you all. Just super appreciate you all speaking with us today. To the audience, I do want to call out that we have a very balanced set of perspective here on the call. If we think about just the compliance lifecycle journey, we can take a look at the different roles we have at play here. So we have Jenna from the healthy side. That's more of the organization that's gone through a HITRUST certification and is compliant with HIPAA today. You have Shrish from A-LIGN. They're the auditor and a HITRUST assessor. You have Ryan from HITRUST themselves, who manage and make that framework available for us and manage the continuous updates of those things. And then Vanta as the readiness platform. So all that to say is it's going to be a very fun conversation. And there's a lot of room for questions. So if you have them, please enter them in the Q&A chat. That said, I'm just going to go ahead and dive in. And to set the stage, I do want to offer a quick differentiation between industry standards and regulations. HIPAA, just a good core topic component here, is a regulation that originally came out in 1996, and it provides guidelines and requirements for protection of PHI. And though that applies to organizations that manage, store, or access that. HITRUST, on the other hand, it's an industry standard framework that prescribes very specific and great governance and data protection requirements across several framework sources that can also include your HIPAA compliance, amongst a lot of other things. The reason I like that differentiation here is that though they're related, they are oftentimes represented and thought about differently in different customer landscapes. So for example, if we go back to a common question I get here about how do I get HIPAA certified? Well, you don't really get HIPAA certified specifically. You can become HIPAA compliant, but you might be able to become HITRUST certified to illustrate your HIPAA compliance. So it's just that differentiation there that I want to set the stage with, because it'll sort of build upon that throughout the rest of this conversation. Now, Ryan, just to get us kicked us off here, just knowing how technology and related bad actors have evolved in the past several years, what are some security considerations that may be more gray when thinking about implementing HIPAA alone?
Yeah, I think it's important to take a look at when HIPAA was signed into law, right? So Faisal, you mentioned 1996, it's 28 years ago. It hasn't been updated since then. Now, there's talk that it's getting updated and there'll be an update in the next year or two. But point being is, what didn't exist 28 years ago? The cloud didn't exist. AI was in its infancy. We didn't have Gen AI. So the safeguards that are built into the security rule not only are aged, but they were written very purposely to be vague. Because if you think about the US healthcare industry, you have everything from the HCAs of the world, enormous organizations, to the United Health Group, all the way down to one or two doc practices that have to comply with this. So the playing field is not equal. So HIPAA was written to apply across the board, which from a governmental purpose or perspective it meets the purpose. It meets the intent of what that law was trying to do. But the problem is the world is changing. It has changed in 28 years. It continues to change. I was at a show at a conference a few weeks ago, and someone said to me, the next version of AI isn't next year, it's next month. Like, that's how fast things are moving. So how does complying with HIPAA actually help you? I would argue I'm not sure it does, other than satisfying the requirement of federal law and keeping regulators off your back. And so I'm not espousing, or I'm not suggesting that people should ignore HIPAA and not do it, because they should, absolutely. But you can't rely on HIPAA to actually protect your organization and protect your data and hope, and more dramatically, protect patients.
Appreciate that, Ryan. And yeah, that's a very good thing to call out there when we think about the difference between security and compliance, right? It's one thing to be compliant, but are you doing all the necessary security steps to protect your organization, the data that you store, and the customers that you're servicing? So completely hear you there. I do want to tie into that some more from your perspective, Ryan. How does HITRUST go beyond HIPAA's guidelines then when we think about being more of that gold standard? Are there parts of the framework that give it a bit of an edge almost when we think about this constant evolving landscape of technology and risk?
So I'm going to sound biased, and I am, but I think the answer is absolutely yes. HITRUST builds off of HIPAA, but goes way further and actually helps organizations. So, quick history lesson: HITRUST is 17 years old at this point. It was born out of answering the question that all of healthcare was asking, which is, what the heck does HIPAA want me to do? Because it's so vague. It's written with purpose. Our founder, along with several other industry stakeholders, came together to write this really prescriptive framework. So at the very start, HITRUST told healthcare how to implement these controls, not the specific technologies, but the way they should be configured, the way they should scale, how effective they should be. But we've evolved over 17 years. As I mentioned, HIPAA is 28 years old. If you look at something like ISO 27001, last updated in 2022, before that 2013, that's a 9-year difference. The relevancy of the controls is called into question to a certain degree. We update our framework on a biannual basis. So at a minimum, every 6 months, we are updating the controls within our framework, not only to make them more effective, but to introduce additional standards, regulations, and/or frameworks into our framework to make the harmonization that much easier. But the thing that really gets me excited about the work that HITRUST is doing is we actually have built our assessments. So we have 3 assessments right now, which I think we'll get into a little bit. An E1, which is like the essentials. These are the things that every organization should be doing foundationally. We have our I1, which is leading security practices, and then our most rigorous, most comprehensive, and the assessment we're most known for, our R2, is tailorable. You can make it really whatever you need it to be. But all that to say is, on a quarterly basis, HITRUST, we're ingesting actual threat data and threat intelligence and bouncing that off of the MITRE ATT&CK framework to understand the TTPs that are being used, and then using the mitigation strategies from MITRE and analyzing the controls within our 3 assessments. And if we identify a gap, meaning we don't have a control that's protecting against the threat that's happening in the wild today, we will make that adjustment. Now, if it's a flat out gap, we will add a new control. If it's just an element with an existing control, we will make that adjustment too. So we're the only ones who have built these assessments based on threats, as opposed to people that are in a room, very smart people, by the way, not suggesting that they're not qualified, but it's based on the things that are actually happening, the way people are being attacked. And our controls are actually built to protect against those controls. So to me, that's really the differentiator between HIPAA and HITRUST, is that we build on top of HIPAA, but we actually are forcing organizations to get better based on the things we know will actually protect them.
That's awesome. Thank you, Ryan. Shrish, would love your thoughts on there, especially from the auditor perspective, right? I think that I imagine you see a lot of not only HITRUST engagements, but customers that come to you just for HIPAA. So I'm very curious what those conversations are like and what additional things you have to add there.
Yeah, I want to take a step back and understand why HITRUST was even incepted, right, 18 years ago, back in 2007. because I mean, there clearly were other frameworks that existed at the time, right? We had ISO, we had PCI, we had NIST. We didn't have SOC 2 at the time. SOC 2 would come later in 2011, I think, but we had SAS 70 back in the day, right? I'm dating myself now. But the leaders in the industry still thought there was a clear void in a framework that encapsulated all the fundamental things that these, ISO, SOC, NIST, they had, or SAS 70 they had. And so there was a growing appetite for a framework that was extremely robust, comprehensive, right? That was scalable and was a certification, not an attestation. And we can dive into why that's important here in a second. But most importantly, right, this elusive gold standard word gets thrown around pretty loosely. But the reason that, in my opinion, that it got that elusive name is because it utilizes the maturity model of testing, right? It's not a check the box exercise, that organizations have the ability to keep enhancing their security posture year in and year out. That's how the framework is really built, right? You can still be deficient in a particular element of a control, but still get certified, right? Obviously, you have to meet the baseline thresholds of scoring to get certification, but you have that ability to get certified, but then whatever you're deficient on, you take that as a corrective action plan and grow into it year in and year out, right? Because compliance is not a one-stop game, right? It keeps evolving over time. And the beauty of that is, as Ryan alluded to, this framework does a tremendous job of adapting to this, changing cyber threat landscape. And especially with AI now, right? What is today is not going to be what's going to be, what is going to be tomorrow, let alone in 3 months or 6 months and 12 months. So I'm not knocking off HIPAA by any stretch of the imagination. I think there's a place for that, right? I think it's a foundational framework for healthcare data, going back to 1996, but it just lacks the specificity and the depth needed to address today's, sophisticated security challenges. And HITRUST provides a framework for us to do that. And that's why we see, right, from an auditor standpoint, I see a lot of organizations that are coming to they're coming to us and asking, hey, can I just do HIPAA? Can I just be HIPAA compliant? Or what extra can the HITRUST framework offer? And after we articulate all these things that I said, and they're like, all right, yeah, I mean, the ROI, the value proposition of the framework, it's night and day.
Absolutely. No, I that's very valid, especially the point of just the prescriptiveness differentiation, right? If we think about just how HIPAA is written, and even if we think about regulation abroad, right? Regulation is meant to be a bit more broader in terms of the way it's written, but because of that, it can lack the prescriptiveness that's required from that security side of the house when it comes to protection requirements. And completely hear you there. I'd love to touch on some common misconceptions with the framework, especially just knowing just what it does and how it compares now. I know that one common one that comes up for me a lot is this concept that a HITRUST E1 or an I1 could fully cover HIPAA compliance for an organization. And the reality is it doesn't. It's that when you do an R2 and you scope in that specific requirements, that can help you go in and do that. But Shrish and from there, Ryan, are there any others that you'd weigh in on, perhaps based off of conversations that you guys have had, or that you find that come up during audit engagements?
Yeah, so I can go first, Ryan. The first one that I hear all the time is this HITRUST framework is extremely tough to do, right? It requires a huge financial burden. It requires a lot of resources to pull off the endeavor, and it takes forever, right? 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 18 months to get a certification. Now, those 5 years ago, if you told me that, I would say yes, those perceptions are true. But HITRUST as a framework has evolved in the last 5 to 6 years. Ryan mentioned the different tiers of assessments. You have the E1, which is the foundational lower tier of assessments. You have the I1, the moderate level of moderate tier, and then the R2, right, which is the gold standard, which is the certification that everybody aspires to get. And so when we're talking just R2 in a silo, yeah, maybe those perceptions are true, but now you have options. You have organizations that are either starting their compliance program from the start, or they are trying to, or they don't fit into this high risk profile category. So they can simply get started with the E1 assessment. And then as their risk profile changes year in and year out, they can move up to the I1 bucket and then eventually to the R2 bucket. So it's no longer this arduous of a task to get through a certification. Now, let me throw one more element to this, right? I've always said this, and I've been saying it in all the talks that I've done here in the last few months. It has never been easier to expand your compliance portfolio by adding on a HITRUST E1 certification. And the reason for that is, right, E1 is obviously 44 static requirements. It has immense synergies with SOC and ISO. So if you're already doing SOC and ISO, and if you say, all right, I'm just going to add E1, half of the work is already done. And to make things even better, that's where you come in, Faisal, right? You provide a very sophisticated GRC tool, the Vanta app, that will make the synergies even, take that to the next level. So you have already inbuilt inherent synergies that exist between all these frameworks. Now you add automation to that. I mean, it's an absolute no-brainer. And so that's the misperception that I hear. But then when we say all these things that exist, then clients do understand that, which is great to see.
Absolutely. Ryan, anything you'd add there?
Oh man, I got tons of ideas. But I think Sharice hit the nail on the head. HITRUST, because of its history, has a very specific reputation. I call the R2 a significant emotional event. I've had customers who, no joke, threw parties when they got through it and were crying while they were getting through it. So that there's definitely something to that, but there's a lot more options and there's a lot more capabilities to support you, whether it be through a Vanta platform, to get through the process, because that evidence generation is difficult, but there's tools out there that can help you get through that. I actually am really curious, Jenna's thoughts on this, being someone who stared HITRUST in the face, has gone through it. Like, what misconceptions did you have that were dispelled during the process?
Yeah, at Healthy, security and compliance has always been top of mind, right? Being HIPAA compliant, day one decision, it's table stakes. And for us, HITRUST represented the gold standard, and it was always something that we wanted to pursue. And so we made the decision to go straight to the R2. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we support a lot of organizations that are trying to sell into payers and health systems. And in order to support them, we needed to do the full R2 compliance. And, I think for us, that meant there were 240 plus controls that we were going to have to tackle. And, we made the decision to work with Vanta because a lot of our security and compliance was already seated with them. And, they were rolling out this new HITRUST platform and automation. When we first stepped into it, I think there was it has this aura, right, of being this really difficult thing to achieve. But at the root of it, right, we knew that it was just going to confirm the work that we're already doing to be compliant and to put security at the forefront of everything we're doing. We're thinking about this on a day-to-day basis when we're building the platform, when we're hiring people, the micro actions that we're taking, right? Being secure and compliant and making sure that the organizations that are relying on us can trust us, right? And know that the platform that they're data is sitting on is secure. So I would say at the outset, right, it seemed overwhelming. We had this whole spreadsheet of all these controls that we needed to get evidence for, but ultimately really just chipped away at it one by one and found that because we've put such a high importance on the security and compliance piece of things as we've been building, we were already HIPAA, SOC 2, GDPR, CCPA, and PCI compliant and certified. So we were able to navigate actually the R2 certification in about 4.5 months, which I think is yeah, pretty wild from what I've heard. And we got the right members of our team together and sat down and really looked through what we needed to do and divided and conquered and set out roles and responsibilities. And I think if you sort of set out a timeline and really just rely on the people at the company that have expertise in certain areas to fill in the blanks when there are blanks, and just really methodically chip away, it's actually not as overwhelming as one might think it would be. Our auditor that we used, we didn't know about A-LIGN, but the auditor that we used, right, they really helped walk us through the process. And I think that's super important, right? Having an auditor that has obviously done this a lot and can sort of be there to handhold you, having Vanta and having them also supporting us through it. We really just chipped away, set milestones that we wanted to reach. If we hit sort of a roadblock, we got on calls and had those conversations about where there might be gaps, or maybe we just weren't thinking about the evidence the right way. And ultimately, yeah, it was not as overwhelming as I imagined it would be, and we were able to exceed like the timeline that we had set for ourselves in terms of certification.
That's awesome. Thank you, Jenna. No, it's a congratulations. Like R2 is as you mentioned, it's seen as a behemoth when it comes to implementing it. It's the more higher complexity, if you will, when we think about the assessments level. So kudos to you and the team. I do want to knit further on just the reasons and factors you went for the R2 route. You did briefly touch on it just now as well, but I wanted to see if there's any perspective that you'd share around how you arrived at doing R2 specifically. And the reason I ask, right, is whether it's a hard customer requirement or it made sense for the business that you were trying to drive. I think that like there are several clients and customers that I work with that don't have a mandate from a customer perspective, and they're trying to figure out, where do I start? And I immediately think too what Teresa just said earlier about E1 and I1 being a good growth path, if you will. But I'm curious, like, what were those conversations like for you, and is there any perspective you'd share from having done this and made those decisions yourself?
I think for us, because we're not a single care delivery organization, right? We're not a single digital health company. And so we're supporting a lot of different care models and a lot of organizations that have varying needs in terms of their security and compliance. And so us getting certified to R2, right, like makes it easier for them to meet the compliance that they need. So in our instance, it just made sense for us to do the complete HITRUST, because we do have organizations, right, that are wanting to comply with the regulations around payers and health systems. If that's not something that your organization needs to touch, then I, as an athlete, right, I see a lot of people that dive into, say, triathlon, or like, I'm going to do an Ironman. And it's like, well, maybe you should start, right, with a sprint triathlon and work your way up, right? So if there isn't an immediate need to do it, then certainly taking the phased approach could maybe make it a little bit easier to digest. But I think from Healthy's perspective, right, we want to be very proactive in the way that we think about security and compliance. As Ryan mentioned, right, like bad actors and the risks, they're constantly changing and it's evolving very quickly. And I think for us, it's like we always want to try to be one step ahead. We don't want to be sort of chasing that moving target. And so going straight through and just meeting the R2 requirements just really made more sense for the size and scale of our organization, the companies that we're supporting, and the growth that we are anticipating having in the next couple of years.
Appreciate that. Yeah, no, I completely hear you. And sometimes it's as stringent as that, right? It's doing the right thing is to go straight for the R2 at that point, because that's going to give you the biggest sense of maturity for the business that you're running, and completely appreciate that holistic perspective you provided. Switching gears, I do want to just go through and talk about the HITRUST certification process. Ryan, would love to hear from you on just what that end-to-end process looks like, where HITRUST as an org comes in, MyCSF as a tool, and how that plays into the equation. I usually tell our customers that the journey both starts and ends with HITRUST and MyCSF, but we'd love to hear from your end on that.
It's super easy. You just call us up and you're certified. All joking aside, it's a well-defined process, right? It obviously starts with contacting HITRUST and getting access to the framework and getting access to our SaaS-based tool called MyCSF, which is where all the assessment work and certification on the back end happens. But I always say, as someone who was an approved external assessor for HITRUST for years, is get with a readiness partner like Vanta, get with an A-LIGN as early as possible, because they're doing this every single day. And you are more than likely married to your environment, and you're afraid to call your baby ugly. And in my experience, it might be ugly. So like, come and find a trusted partner to start the journey with, because what you don't want to have happen is you get down, a benchmarking exercise trying to figure out where you stand against the controls. You're not, able to separate yourself from your environment and figuring out where your gaps may reside. And you hire an A-LIGN and they come in and they just beat you up because they know exactly what HITRUST wants. So I'm foot stomping it for those who may have any kind of military experience. This is like one of the things you take notes on. Get with an external assessor, get with a readiness partner as early as possible. But the process is really four-phased. It's all about scoping, understand what's in scope of the assessment, what's not in scope. HITRUST does not certify organizations, it certifies implemented systems. So you can have applications within your environment that you don't want to put in scope. Maybe you're not selling to the payers and they don't care about those systems and you don't want to increase the level of effort. So scoping, to me, is the single most important aspect of the entire journey. It's easy to underscope, it's easy to overscope. I'm not going to bore you with the details on what I mean by that, but I'm going to point back to my first comment. Get with an external assessor, get with a readiness partner to help you define that. Once you get through scoping, I always encourage people to do some kind of benchmarking or readiness exercise, find where your gaps are, and prioritize those gaps. Figure out what you actually need to close to get to a certifying state, right? HITRUST doesn't actually expect perfection. You can have gaps in your environment and still get certified. So you don't have to fix every single thing. So understanding where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck in actually remediating gaps is where you want to focus. Once you remediate those gaps, that's when the formal assessment takes place, where an A-LIGN will come in, they will do the validation, they will do all the field work, they'll do all the auditing. You're going to produce a lot of evidence because HITRUST is a trust but verify evidentiary assessment. Once that field work is done, the assessment gets submitted to HITRUST. We run arguably 6 different levels of quality assurance against every single assessment, which again sets us apart from everything else that's out there. If you pass the quality assurance work and you have achieved the scoring for certification, we're going to issue your report. So it really boils down, I'll try to summarize all that: scoping, readiness, remediation, validation, and certification. So it's a 4-phase process depending on the assessment. E1, you could probably do that in a handful of months. I1 may take you as many as 6 months. I've seen organizations, clearly not Jenna and Healthy, take over a year to get through the R2 because they just weren't ready for it. So again, foot stomping, get with Vanta, get with A-LIGN, bring them on early, understand expectations, and a shameless plug, even though Faisal, you didn't ask this question, get executive buy-in from the start. You are going to need their help. You are going to have to make decisions, not necessarily to spend a ton of money, but HITRUST is no one's full-time job. It's an additional hat. People are going to be competing for their full-time job, meaning they're going to prioritize the things that they're responsible for. You're going to need executive support to focus those folks and make decisions on how to apply resources. I'm off my soapbox. Faisal, back to you.
No,
Ryan,
absolutely.
can I just
appreciate. Go
Can I
for
just
it,
jump
Jenna.
on that really quickly? I definitely agree, Ryan, with getting the executive support, right? And that's where I think I don't necessarily have a huge background in security and compliance, but as the chief of staff, right, I had the full support of our CTO and our CEO, and because of that, I was able to step in and sort of ask for the help from the various people to make sure that we were moving this forward. And the whole company understood how important it was for us to sort of hit our timeline and to get this done. And because of that, right, I ran into a lot less problems with people wanting to drag their feet or not provide the evidence, right? It was a full team and company-wide movement to get this done, and everyone was very excited, obviously, when we got there. The other thing I wanted to mention, as you're talking about sort of the phasing of this, is it's also important to recognize and to work with your auditor. You may have solutions that you're leveraging that already have HITRUST certifications that you can inherit, right? So you don't have to recreate the wheel on a lot of pieces. Like, you can basically take their HITRUST and like inherit that in for a certain number of controls. And so that also really helped us. I can't remember exactly which parts of it. It was a lot of like the back end. It might have been Aptable and some of the things that we sit on top of. But we basically took their HITRUST certifications, and that helped close a lot of the gaps that existed, in those controls we had to close.
That's awesome. No, thank you for that additional perspective there. Yeah, and I completely agree. I think inheritance of controls from your third parties that have it's very crucial, because it may be things that you don't need to do and aren't responsible for. It's all about the different coverages and how your environment is scoped at that point. So super appreciate that plug there. Also, a small Vanta plug that I want to call out here is that, as Ryan, Trish, and the team at large have called out here, we're a readiness platform, out-of-the-box frameworks for E1, I1, R2, and are actively working on an integration with MyCSF. So that's coming soon for when we talk about scope of requirements and the integration of data between the two systems. Where Vanta will really plug into right in that middle in those steps that Ryan outlined out, with the readiness and remediation side of the house and guiding your implementation of just the HITRUST requirements that you need to do. Here's a fun question, and this context is going to be more around the AI development at large and how it's just everywhere today. You have social media platforms, you have SaaS apps, you have support chatbots that use AI. Heck, like I think I even saw an ad for an AI-powered pillow the other day, and I went, "Wow, like it's just it's growing pretty fast." But all that to say is, AI is evolving, and it's also increasingly getting integrated with healthcare workflows and the industry at large. So to that end, I do want to ask, like, how do each of you see HITRUST addressing data security and integrating concerns around AI-driven operations for yourselves? And Jenna, would love your standpoint first, as from a customer perspective, and then we can go around the horn.
Yeah, AI has been and is going to continue to be like the biggest buzzword, right? We joke it's like every founder's favorite thing to talk about is like AI in healthcare. It's something that we've really taken our time evaluating at Healthy. There are so many great applications for it when you're thinking about a system of record, streamlining workflows, enhancing efficiency for providers, especially like in charting, right? And you're seeing a lot of these startups that are trying to work in those spaces. We're currently working on some LLM features in the Healthy platform. I can't give too much detail on that right now, but I think for us, like we're actually very interested to understand how HITRUST is going to help validate the approach that we're taking. We do work alongside a lot of third parties and partner solutions for all the stuff that we don't build in-house. And whether it's AI or any other functionality, we're always looking at how they think about their security, and we're evaluating that very heavily before we're looking to partner, because obviously that their security and their posture and their stance on that is going to impact sort of our position as well. So I don't necessarily have all of the answers, and I think that's one of the things about being compliant with this and understanding that being certified to HITRUST, it's not like you get a certification, you walk away and you never look at it again. It is an ongoing, living, breathing organism, as most of the compliance certifications are. And so, I fully expect, right, it's going to continue to evolve. And I think that evolution is only going to continue to help us be better for our customers. And at the end of the day, that's what we're driving for, is like, how can we make sure that the organizations that rely on us, their providers, their patients, at the end of the day, right, like that important information that is sitting on top of Healthy is protected. So we'll definitely be relying a lot on sort of the direction and approach that HITRUST takes to make sure that as our AI solutions evolve and as we're building more functionality into Healthy, that we're doing so in a way that is keeping that security top of mind.
Thank you, Jenna. Shirish, I'm gonna pass that to you next to get your perspective.
So first off, just like Jenna said, right, I think we see a lot of organizations getting excited to see what's next, how HITRUST is going to evolve to ingest and encapsulate the AI, the risks around AI, and how that's going to be ingested into the existing HITRUST CSF. So to date, there are two solutions that HITRUST has offered. Okay, so let's go one by one. One is the AI risk management assessment. So this is not a certification. This is a report or an attestation, if you will, that organizations, you don't need to be an existing HITRUST customer. You don't need to have done like an E1, I1, or an R2. You can simply perform this assessment. It's a static 51 requirement assessment, right? Keep me honest on that. That delves into the different layers of AI. So if you're an organization and your stakeholders are asking you to demonstrate assurance on AI elements of your environment, this is probably a great start. The other solution is the AI cybersecurity assessment. So this is a certification. This is not live yet. This is going to go live on December 9th, I believe. Again, Ryan, check me on the dates there, but in a month. And so that's going to be a static 44 requirement certification that you can tag on to your existing E1, I1, or an R2 certification, right? So this one does require you to be you to go through a HITRUST certification. The beauty of that is we've already articulated, right, ad nauseum, all the prescriptive nature of these HITRUST controls. That's why, that's one of the reasons why the gold standard name gets thrown around. And the AI controls are going to be no different, right? The HITRUST is going to do its research. HITRUST is going to go out in the industry and understand how those evolving risks are impacting the organization's environments, and tailor those requirements to those threats. And that's going to be on the AI space. That's just like it is on the E1, I1, and the entire framework. So Ryan, anything else to add on that? It's exciting. And so, a lot of organizations are, all right, when can we get started? Can you give us a lot of details? So every single day I'm talking to them about that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we should bring Jenna and Shirish on the HITRUST team, because they just stole my thunder. No, so HITRUST is very, very, very focused on AI right now. As Shirish mentioned, we have a risk management assessment that's available today. It's arguably a blending of the NIST AI RMF and ISO 23894, which is a risk management standard from ISO. So it kind of brings those two together. That cannot result in a certification, but as Sharice mentioned, it's at a higher risk management level. It's not hardcore security controls, like controls around the technology specifically. Last October at our annual conference called Collaborate, shameless plug, there'll be another one next year. Get your tickets now. We announced that we wanted to be the first to bring a security certification for AI technologies to the market. Sharice just mentioned it will be released in the next, I think, 45 days. It's the second or third week of December, or sorry, first or second week of December. I don't know if it's the 9th specifically. And the only reason why I'm saying that is we actually put out a request for comment to the world. We released the controls and we said, hey, what do you like about these controls? What don't you like? Because nobody's written these before. There is no such thing as an AI security certification or standard today. So we were looking for feedback. We got all that feedback. So we're now incorporating that feedback into the assessment itself. So that will be released. You can actually get on the path today. You don't have to wait for it to be released. If you have any questions, I think you'll have my email or my contact information at the end of this. Feel free to reach out to me. I'll talk your ear off about it. But we're going to continue to evolve. You want to know what HITRUST is doing? Is we're doing what we've done for 17 years. We're going to learn and we're going to evolve, and we're going to take a look at what's happening across all industries, and probably more specifically from a threat perspective. And we're just going to continue to improve. Now, there are some talks internally because HITRUST, we're solely focused on security, and there's many more pillars of responsible AI that are really not in our core competencies. There are talks about, hey, do we start to dabble in these spaces because AI is kind of the future, and to be a bit dramatic. I don't know if any of that's going to come to fruition, but I guess I'll leave you with, we're going to be first to market with this. We're going to continue to evolve. If you have feedback, you get into it and you're like, yeah, you guys missed the mark on X, Y, and Z. We want to hear that because we want to improve it. And we'd like to get the first certified systems out the door and done in early 2025.
Thank you, Ryan. Before we open the floor to Q&A, as we're almost at time here, I'd love to end with this last question, and it's really around any advice or takeaways each of you would have for organizations that are on the fence about pursuing a HITRUST certification. What would you tell them? And Jenna, we'll start with you, and then get Shreesh and Ryan to chime in as well.
Yeah, I think for anyone working in healthcare, when it comes to security and compliance, you can't ever do enough, right? We should be always operating proactively, not operating reactively. As I, alluded to earlier, really setting aside adequate time to achieve the certification, right? Getting that buy-in, as Ryan mentioned, really assigning out like roles and responsibilities for your team, having someone that is going to sort of lead the charge. And obviously that person doesn't necessarily have to have all of the information about this. I think you surround yourself by really smart people. You bring in, a readiness platform, you bring in your auditor, right? You ask the questions, you rely on the fact that there are people out there that have been doing this and do this all of the time. And you sort of make them your partner in walking through this. I think, again, going back to understanding the why behind the HITRUST level that you're going to work towards, right? If you don't have to do R2 out the gate and that seems overwhelming, then it may make sense to start with something smaller and sort of chip away at this, right? But for us, I think when we're thinking about where our company is headed, who we're supporting, and thinking about the growth and evolution of that, and wanting to also be at the forefront of security and compliance and letting the organizations that we work with know that they can trust us, right? It helps them want to buy into working with us. And it also helps us as we move forward. I think having your team, your whole company, whether they're the people that are going to be going in and collecting the evidence, or they're just your other employees that are in there day in and day out, like having them always have this idea in mind about how important security and compliance is, and even talking through, we've shared at some length, right, like with the team, like why we're doing HITRUST and what HITRUST is, so that they also understand the importance of it, and the work that we're doing to make sure that our platform is staying at the cutting edge of being secure and compliant for our customers. So yeah, really just like mapping out a timeline, getting the right team together, finding those partners that you can trust, and then just really methodically chipping away at this. And as was mentioned earlier, right, there's a lot of this where you can get certified and perhaps you need to sort of grow into some of those controls and mature into that. And knowing that it's not necessarily like all or nothing also. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, I can go next. I think like Jenna said, right, I think it starts with the top, starts right at the top. As organizations grow quickly, right, especially in the S market and the mid market, we see this organizations, they're rapidly growing, but then the compliance gets set on the back burner. They don't really, there's a check in the box exercise. We'll just kind of get to it when we get to it, right? They'll do a SOC 2 report, they'll do an ISO, they'll put somebody that has a day job and they say, all right, just kind of get this done in the evening time and let off we go, right? That is not the right approach. I think security and compliance need to be an immense part of your organization's growth. I think that's the long-term game that senior leadership needs to understand and provide that all-in approach so that it kind of flows down from there, right? So that's number one. Number two, I really like the analogy that Jenna used earlier, this triathlon strategy, right? Know where you are, right? If you're already running a marathon, if you're really good at biking and swimming, yeah, maybe you can afford to do an R2 right off the gate, right? But if you've never run in your life before, if you're starting out with a 5K, doing a triathlon, signing up for the Ironman in Hawaii is probably not the right thing to do. There are options for you to get started on that journey. Start with the E1. Take advantage of Vanta, right? Take advantage of, or hire a trusted partner like A-LIGN so that we will set you up for success, not only in the short term, but all the way through, and help you bolster your security posture from year in and year out.
Thank you, Shrish. Ryan, off to you.
So I feel like I should say this now that we brought it up a couple times. I have run marathons, and an Ironman is on my bucket list. So Jenna, I may ask you some questions. Yeah, a couple things. People frequently ask me, why the heck should I do HITRUST? Super hard, it can be expensive. It's in some cases not necessary. And I usually point to a couple different things. One, if you look at the OCR wall of shame, for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, you are required to report a breach of 500 records or more to the OCR, and they actually put you up on a publicly facing website that shows all of the breaches since 2009. And I tell people that I'm willing to bet that an overwhelming majority or overwhelming percentage of those organizations have at some point uttered, I'm HIPAA compliant. And that tells me that HIPAA is not enough, right? You're going to do HIPAA. You need to do HIPAA, but you can't rely on HIPAA. It is not going to protect you. Then I point to the sexiest percentage that I have ever heard in my entire life from a security perspective of 0.64. We released a trust report in April of this year that broke down a bunch of different statistics and talked about why HITRUST works. And in 2022 and 2023, of all of the HITRUST certified environments, only 0.64% of those environments, less than 1%, had suffered a breach in that 2-year period across all of our assessments. Less than 1%. Depending on who you talk to, the statistics vary, But the lowest I've ever heard is 53% of organizations across all industries last year suffered an incident or a breach. You are statistically more likely than not to suffer a breach. And high trust environments are less than 1%. That's the why. And where's the discrepancy? Why is there a discrepancy? It's because of all the things that we've talked about today, right? Primarily, the threat-based assessments that we've built, and we continue to update and manage. HITRUST works. The reason why I came to work at HITRUST is because, like I said, I've been doing this for 10 plus years. I've seen organizations go from okay at security and privacy to being rock stars by the time they got through the certification. It works. It actually forces you to get better and change things and put things in place. And Jenna hit the nail on the head. Like, you have to continuously work on it. And HITRUST is a forcing function to continuously work on it. So if you're on the fence and you're wondering, is HITRUST right for me, or should I go forth with it? Think about the wall of shame. And this is not, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I'm not trying to fill you with FUD. That's a reality. Think about 0.64%, and then, the decision may become a little bit easier. Off my soapbox.
No, thank you, Ryan. No, it's very helpful perspective from all of you, and truly appreciate it. A plus 100 to everything that's been said so far. Couldn't have said better. We are going to dive into Q&A now. I realize that we have a handful of minutes here, so I'm just going to go ahead and take a look at the questions that came through the chat. The first one that we'll cover is for so anonymous attendee. For his software companies starting with E1 for their software products sold into the healthcare market that have already done a third-party HIPAA compliance attestation, could they still say the product is HIPAA compliant with an E1, or should they maintain their current third-party attestation? Brian, I'll give that one to you first.
Yeah, there's actually a few of these HIPAA compliant related questions. And Faisal, you actually said it earlier. The E1 and the I1 does not on its own satisfy HIPAA, so you will still have to do some kind of HIPAA work. But I will offer that you can use HITRUST as kind of the foundation to get HIPAA compliant, right? So you can take the work you've done from HITRUST and apply it to whatever you need to do from a HIPAA compliance perspective. But it won't flat out satisfy it.
Absolutely. The next one we'll cover is an R2 easier to obtain if an organization follows NIST 2, ISO 27001, and SOC 1 and SOC 2?
Yes and no.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, like any good security professional, I'm going to respond with, it depends. The things, and Sharish, I'm sorry,
No,
please jump in, but I just want to say that HITRUST isn't like those other things, but there's a lot of stuff that you can use in those other activities for HITRUST, but I'm going to defer to the expert.
Yeah, the biggest uptick from having done those reports to the HITRUST, especially if we're talking about the R2 assessment, is going to be the level of stringency, and Jenna can attest to this, the level of stringency that you have to meet from a documentation standpoint. HITRUST has a very prescriptive requirement in terms of how your policies need to look, how in-depth the procedures need to tell the story. As long as you have that, then yes, there's a lot of synergies that can be gained from those reports, but I think the documentation is organization's biggest Achilles heel when they move up.
Thank you. The next one we'll cover is we're a digital health company shifting from consumer-based to one that's also partners with health plans, and we'll be working with member data. At what juncture do we need to move from a SOC 2 to a HITRUST?
Harish, I think you're probably the best person to answer this question. I'm happy to take a stab at it, though.
So, I mean, at what point you need to kind of graduate up to an HITRUST? I mean, that's it depends kind of a question, depending on the level of maturity that you have in an organization, the level of mandate that you're facing from the stakeholders asking for a HITRUST report. So I think I would kind of classify that as it depends. But I think if you've successfully completed, let's say, a SOC 2, a type 2 report, right, looking at the operating effectiveness of those requirements over a period of time, then you will be best suited, like we've said before, to get started with an E1 certification. It's going to come to you naturally. There's a lot of synergies that can be gained. It's not going to be as arduous of a process.
Agreed. And I think that also applies to the next one, which was around having a virtual health program, working with payers, FQHCs, actuarial, and MCOs. The reality is the level of security just depends on what is the scope of your requirement. It does depend, like, do you have specific clientele that's mandating these things, or do you have the flexibility to start a place and grow into it? Ultimately, if you have a large volumes of PHI or sensitive data, I'd say your goal and North Star should be R2, but that might not be where you start to begin with. It just really depends on the business context. And I do want to recognize that we are at time. I do want to thank everyone for the attending, all the audience for attending the session and listening to our chat here. And special thank you to the speakers. Super appreciate the time here that you spent and all the education of HITRUST, HIPAA, and how to go beyond. Just minor plug for Vanta as a whole. If you're interested in HITRUST and you want to pursue that journey, we have several different pieces of contact information here. Vanta as a whole, we have the readiness platform for you guys for the different level of assessments, integration to my CSF that's coming through. Please reach out to us and the folks here, and we can definitely communicate with you further. Thank you all.
Thank you to Vanta and to everyone that joined us today. Please visit our website at community.hlth.com to catch up on all health GoLive webinars. And join us in Nashville, February 16th through 19th for Vive 2025.